video is all about the concept of conversational interviewing. Conversational interviewing is a foundational philosophy that will help us achieve two things: provide the best experience possible to clients and determine the root causes of intake. This can really help with any aspect of having conversations with the public, from trying to provide pet support to completing adoptions. It's really an alternate way to view a traditional interview. For example, in a job interview, you may have experienced having an onslaught of standardized questions, such as, why are you interested in this job? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Where a lot of times there really isn't much of an organic conversation at all. It's just you answering questions. And conversational interviewing is basically the opposite of that. It's an approach that allows for flexibility to alter your response or your follow up question based on the ebb and flow of an authentic conversation. And it allows you to put things in your own words that really feel comfortable to you. It balances getting the information you need while also being approachable and tailoring your conversation to the individual in front of you. Let's switch gears and walk through an example intake scenario. Kate and I are going to do a script for you. We're going to act it out. Of course, this will be a little bit stilted because we are reading, but just imagine this conversation happening in person.
Hi, I'm here to surrender my dog.
Okay, could you tell us why you're giving him up?
Well, for one, he is really hyper. Every time my girlfriend and I get home, he jumps all over us. Also, my girlfriend is pregnant, and I just don't know if having a dog right now is best for our growing family.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry to hear that. If you would like, we have a dog training program where you can get some assistance.
No, no, thank you. I think I just want to give him up to you regardless. When I approach him when he's eating, he snarls at me and tries to snap at me, which is a big problem. Taking care of him and the baby will just be too much. I won't be able to pay as much attention to him as I do now, anyways. Sorry.
Okay, I understand that. Now that you've heard this scenario, think about, what do you consider the primary reason for surrender to be? Pause for a moment and think critically about this. If you had trouble deciding on a primary reason, there is a really good reason why. As you can see with this visualization, there were a lot of things to unpack within this one scenario. Multiple behavior reasons, that the animal maybe is too active, growls around food, so perhaps some resource guarding. The individual was going through life change with a new baby, and they indicated that, taking care of the dog along with the baby might just be too much for them to handle at this time. Most animal shelter softwares, including yours, only allows us to capture very limited intake reason data, most of the time just a singular one. And as you can see, with situations like these, there are often multiple things adding to the scenario. And, with using a singular intake reason, we really lose the ability to capture the complexities of the situation, which means later when we reference the data to try to inform programming and pet support, things like that, that data just loses some of its value because it doesn't truly represent what is going on in each of these individual intake scenarios. Additionally, when trying to drill all of this down into one reason, a lot of times our personal biases come into play. For example, I personally have a dog training background, and in my shelter work history, worked in helping to find a pathway through the shelter for the most challenging population of dogs. What stands out to me are the behavior items, because I know as the animal goes through the shelter, that might be the most challenging thing for the shelter to intervene with and to help the animal through. So for me, I might see the primary reason as being behavior related, but the owner might consider it to be the fact that they're overwhelmed or the new baby is the catalyst for all of this. This slide showcases some aspects of conversational interviewing. As we navigate difficult conversations and situations like the scenario we just explored, these tactics can help you navigate those situations and make the best of them. And, the first of which is approaching with non judgment. We all come to the table with different biases, variations in our own backgrounds and personal experiences. And for those, it's important to just at least try to be aware of those. And the way I view this is to at least try to focus on being present as opposed to immediately interpreting what is in front of you. As humans, we are constantly trying to essentially categorize things that are in front of us. A lot of times we try to place things in categories in our mind. We hear something that is in front of us and we might try to categorize it as good or as bad or as one thing or the other. And when you're showing up for someone and showing up to a difficult situation, trying to, as best you can, put some of that aside and just focus on being there and being present, which is oftentimes very difficult. And, a part of that is leading with empathy as well. And, as folks who are working in the field of animal welfare, we often have a natural empathy for animals. That's why we're here, at least initially. So we have a great jumping off point for extending that empathy towards humans. And with leading with empathy, it's all about, doing what you can to take the perspective of another human, oftentimes going through hardship, recognizing that they're going through and might have some difficult emotions, or they're having an emotional experience, potentially bringing their animal to the shelter. And, on the other side of things, people can usually tell when we're coming at the situation with an empathetic approach, right? It's all in our body language, what questions we ask, of what our facial expressions are saying. And so by showing up with empathy, people recognize that and it really helps fuel connection. And the more we feel connected and supported, the better you're going to be able to understand their situation, which puts you in a better place to help people. Asking open-ended questions is pretty crucial. This really helps in getting their story. If we start out a lot of times with these conversations asking broad questions like, how can I help you? What brings you here today? And letting them tell their story in their own words. And on the practical side of things, this is also really positive for our data collection because we're not asking leading questions. For example, if we ask probably any dog or cat owner if their animal has any behavioral quirks, probably everyone's going to say something because our animals do have quirks, even the most well behaved ones. And so if we start leading with very specific questions, we might alter the way they would have told their own story. And practicing active listening. So, one thing I like to talk about with this is just very practical tips. So, how can you help yourself be more of an active listener? And one thing that's big for me, and I think big for a lot of folks in animal welfare, is trying to help limit distractions, which is really hard in a shelter environment. So, do you have a good place to have these conversations, a quieter place in the shelter that will allow you to focus? Can you limit distractions for things like notifications on cell phones? I know a lot of us carry multiple cell phones, our personal and our work one. So, how can we put some of those things aside that might contribute to you being distracted? And also doing what you can to convey that you're an active participant in the conversation. So things like making eye contact and nodding and facial expressions that show that you're truly listening. And being mindful of body language. And this kind of goes both ways, mindful of our own personal body language, can be really simple things like if you're standing there with your arms crossed, that might convey a little bit more of a closed off or a less open mindset. So things like that, being aware of yourself, which you may, if you want to have a good window into how what your body language is conveying to people, ask your coworkers, ask them to kind of keep an eye on how you're interfacing with people and ask for feedback. That's the best way to do that. It's hard sometimes to be fully aware of what we're doing with our own bodies. But on the other side, being mindful of body language of the client. And so keep a lookout for signs that someone is having a hard time, maybe feeling overwhelmed, and use those things to help modify how you have the conversation. So, for example, if you see that someone is kind of shutting down or getting overly emotional about talking to you and having a difficult conversation, you can pause the conversation. And perhaps you can say, "Oh, I see a coworker needs my attention. If you don't mind, I'd like to pause this conversation for a couple minutes and I'll be right back." And what you're actually doing is giving them a second to reset. So think about tactics that you might take if you see that someone is really having a hard time, and just being mindful of what their body language is telling you. And showing up in this way where we're, coming to a conversation or to a scenario with non judgment, with empathy, all of these concepts is oftentimes really hard. We don't always have the best of days. Sometimes we are struggling in our personal lives, or we're in crisis mode at the shelter. So showing up in this way is oftentimes hard. And so think for a minute, what puts you in a good place to show up in this sort of way on a daily basis? What sets you up for success? And then on the flip side of that, are you able to recognize when you're not having the best day and showing up in an empathetic way might be more difficult? Sometimes it's about recognizing when you're having a difficult day, and in conversations with shelters and doing this work, sometimes it's about recognizing that and potentially asking for help. If you know you're facing or you're going to be facing a conversation that's going to be really hard and you're not having the best day and you don't feel as equipped to tend to that situation in the best way possible, maybe that's time to lean on a coworker for some help, and that's okay. So I encourage you after this session to really think about these approaches, and if there are ways that can help you really refine your skills with these tenets of conversational interviewing, because they are really important to having a successful conversation, providing the best pet support and human support that we can, and supporting the data collection, which will help us help the community at large. Let's go through this thought exercise together. We'll act out a scenario, and while we do, think about these strategies that are up on the screen right now. Thanks for reaching out to us. We see you're requesting to surrender your cat Pickles. Can we ask you a couple of questions to ensure we can support you in the best way?
Okay.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on and what brings you here today?
Yeah, I need to give up Pickles. She's just too expensive right now. I can't.
Okay. Thanks for sharing that. And I see in your form you mentioned that you recently lost your job. That sounds like a really difficult situation. And you mentioned that Pickles care is expensive. Is there a specific aspect of her care that you're referring to?
Yeah, just like going to the vet and all her medical stuff. It's most of that is just really, really expensive.
Okay. We see you mentioned Pickles may be experiencing a non-emergency illness. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, so Pickles had ringworm when she was a kitten, and it comes back sometimes, and then we have to go to the vet. It's a lot.
Oh, okay. Well, we'd love to help find a way to support you in Pickles if possible. If we could provide things like food and medical treatment or supplies, would you be interested in keeping her?
No, I don't think so. I love her so much, but it's just really hard to care for her right now. It's so expensive, and I don't think I can do it anymore.
Okay, I understand. And, we know this decision was likely not an easy one, and we're here to help you through this process. Do you have any interest in helping find a new adopter for Pickles? We prefer to keep pets in a home environment when possible instead of the shelter. And since you know Pickles best, you could be her best advocate to a potential adopter. And if we provide you with all of the things you would need to care for her, would you be interested in doing that?
No, no, I really just need to give her up no matter what right now.
Okay, I understand. Since you mentioned there were several factors that apply to your situation, including, Pickle's chronic medical issues, the cost of her care, and your recent job loss, can you tell me what you would consider to be the main reason you need to surrender Pickles?
Yeah, I mean, really, she's just too expensive right now. I just can't afford it. I just can't. I want to get her the best care, and I just can't afford it right now.
Okay, thank you. Really appreciate you sharing all of this information with us today. What stood out to you about this conversation? I'll take a pause to let you think about it. Did you notice any themes in the story? One thing that stood out to me was that this individual seems like they're at a point where the solutions we're offering don't really seem doable to them. Makes you wonder that maybe there's some more going on with the situation that is going unsaid, perhaps something unspoken. And that's okay. Also, is there anything that you would like to know more about that stood out to you? Perhaps an opportunity for some follow up questions? I'm wondering if and how they've treated pickles for ringworm before, and if they have any thoughts on why this might be recurring. Let's walk through one more scenario together. This one is for an adoption return. The owner states that the puppy isn't active enough. What is your immediate thought after hearing this? Information came from a real shelter, and what we learned from their experience was that upon hearing that the puppy isn't active enough, there were some concerns that the owner perhaps or the adopter didn't give the puppy enough time to settle into the new environment, to decompress from being in the shelter. However, through the process of conversational interviewing, learned a little bit more, and actually the owner was coming forth with real concerns about the puppy from the medical side, thinking that they expected the puppy to be active, and that if that puppy was not as active as they expected, that perhaps there was something wrong. And they really came forward out of concern. So this is a great example of showing up to the conversation, being present and non-judgmental, and using those conversational interviewing skills to dig a little deeper to help get to the root cause of the situation. We covered many concepts in this video. I highly encourage you to take them and do some practicing. So, get with a colleague, practice some common intake scenarios that you see, and get used to following up with those detailed questions and navigating those difficult conversations. Practice can really help you get these concepts underway, and getting feedback from your coworkers on, you know, how they could potentially see you asking more detailed questions, or different approaches they've tried in their work experience. So really, this you shouldn't expect to watch this video and to go out and to be able to perfectly execute these concepts without getting some practice under your belt. So I highly encourage you to set aside some time to help yourself get comfortable with these. It takes a lot of work and a lot of self reflection.